What is the most statistically improbable thing that has ever happened to you? I drove to the park to go running, using my cell phone as GPS. When I was done, I put my phone on the top of my car and spent a few minutes stretching. Then I got in my car and drove home. On the way home, driving about 35 with the window down, I took a turn and the cell phone slid off the roof of the car and into my open window, bouncing off my arm and landing in my lap. I never told anyone because I didn't think they'd believe me. You made it sound like you drove to the park, said this is going to be a good run, stretched for a few minutes, then got in your car and went home. In 2007 I read The 4 Hours Work Week by Tim Ferriss. The book inspired me to quit my job and move to Uruguay. En route to Uruguay, I got in line to get my passport stamped. The guy in line directly in front of me was Tim Ferriss on his way to Uruguay for the first time. I introduced myself and told him his book inspired my life change. We had a nice 3-minute conversation while standing in line. Cool guy. You're gonna be so mad when he writes the 3-minute conversation. The work I used to do required me to carry a lot of keys. At the end of my shift every day I would go to hang up my keys on a cup hook. But as I entered the room I would toss them over to the board with the hooks, trying to get them to land on the hook. And every day the keys would miss and fall to the floor. I would retrieve them and hang them and sit and do my paperwork. One day, at the end on my shift, I was a bit later than usual and the supervisors were in the room. Again I tossed my keys and they hooked. All of the supervisors were stunned, but my direct supervisor said, "I bet you couldn't ever do that again." I grabbed the keys off the hook, walked over to the door and tossed them again. And again they landed on the hook. And in the 2 years of working there, that was the only 2 times they caught. That, my friend, is the true clutch gene. When I was a kid, I went to a hockey game with my family. We're sitting there enjoying the game. I'm drinking my Sprite and having a good time. My dad turns to me and asks if I wanted a hot pretzel. Hells yeah, I want a hot pretzel. I take my Sprite bottle with me and we go and get our hot pretzels. On our way back, we couldn't remember which aisle we were on. My dad said I think it was 15. No, I said, we were in aisle 16. I believed it with conviction. My dad was like LOL okay and we went down aisle 16. We walked down to our row and we were on the wrong side of it. I was wrong. Derp, we were supposed to be in aisle 15. Instead of climbing the stairs and going around everyone, we were those discourteous douchebags who shuffle their way across the aisle to get to the other side. I held my Sprite bottle by the neck, tight against my stomach, so I could take up less space as I sidled past people. All of a sudden, my pop bottle is gone. It's just missing. There is Sprite everywhere. I'm sticky. The girl sitting behind me is sticky. Crap's messy. What the frick? I look on the ground and my Sprite bottle is completely crunched in half. This was back in the days when Sprite bottles were made of pretty tough plastic. They didn't give a dang about the environment. Earlier I saw people on the ice with slingshots launching balled up t-shirts into the audience. I thought that they were balls for street hockey at the time, so I assumed I got hit by one. So I looked on the ice. There was nobody on the ice at all. What caught my eye was the Jumbotron. I was on the Jumbotron, looking like the confused child that I was. Here's what happened. The puck was in play and somehow got shot over the protective glass and into the audience. It hit dead center into my Sprite bottle. Had I not brought the Sprite bottle with me, I would have been hit in the stomach. Had I just listened to my dad and we went down the right aisle, it would have hit the girl I was standing in front of, in the face. We remained on the Jumbotron until I reached my seat. We were only a couple rows behind the visiting team's bench, and the coach called me down. He gave me their goalie stick, signed, and congratulated me on my great save. I still have both the stick and the Sprite bottle. The girl I was in front of ended up finding the puck underneath the seat in front of her. It was a good day for what? I was teaching ESL in Korea and we went out one night to a local bar that had a monthly open mic night where a lot of us foreigners would gather. I got chatting with a random white guy at the bar and asked where he was from. He said Ottawa. I was like no way. I used to live in Ottawa. Whereabouts in Ottawa did you live? He answered. Sandy Hill. I once again said, no way haha. I had a car stolen that was found there. His face goes slack. Was it an 88 to 91 Honda Civic? Yes. Yeah, I think that was me. Let me get your drinks for the night. TLDR. While traveling in Korea, I met the guy who had stolen my car 4 years earlier in Ottawa. My parents divorced when I was an infant. My biological father was abusive and an alcoholic amongst other issues, so my mother chose to forego child support in order to keep our location a secret. Fast forward 13 years, 15-year-old me boards a plane to California, I live in Nye, and head to a sleepaway camp for a week. At the camp I start talking to this girl and grow instantly enamored. So the girl and I down almost all of our time together during camp, but she is also there with one of her friends. So on the fourth night the three of us are sitting around a campfire talking, and I tell them about how I live with my mom and why. Mention that last we had heard my father was living somewhere out west and that I hadn't seen him since I was a baby. I also mentioned that my mother had just recently gotten remarried to a man we had been living with for almost 10 years and that he had adopted me, so I took his last name. And now this is where crap gets weird. The girl's friend, let's call her Amanda, asks what my biological father's last name was, so I tell her and she gets crazy pale. She asks me a ton of questions about him. What nationalities is he? Italian, Native American, African American? Where did B and your mother live? Small town just north of NYC? And a bunch of other stuff. She starts crying and tells me that perfectly explains my father. He moved out here after his first wife left him. He and my mom had me, got married and then had my younger brother. I think you're my older brother, and that is how I kept my sister, who I didn't know existed, in a camp of 300 plus kids across an entire continent. TLDR. Met my little sister, who I didn't know existed, in a sleepaway camp on the other side of the country. Okay people, I get it, my life story is similar to Parent Trap. Was totally thinking Parent Trap. I thought I was getting trolled. I got pulled over by the police because my car and the car in front of me had the same license plate. I was sitting at lights behind a wee black Vauxhall, with a police car behind me. Next thing I know, the police are asking us both to pull over. We both had the same license plate. Turns out that both cars were registered at the same dealership on the same day. A clerical error had led to both getting the same plate. Months later, we are both sitting at the same traffic light and the police are there to see it. This happened in Glasgow, Scotland about 10 years ago. Plates are unique in the United Kingdom. The format at the time was LNNLLL. L equals letter, N equals number. When I was at university I would quite often get a taxi ride after a night out from a nice old man nicknamed Grandpa. He had Grandpa on his taxi license and had business cards with Grandpa on them, etc. He would always give you cheap rides and come whenever you called. Anyway, 4 years or so passed without me getting a ride from him. I had heard rumors that he had died, which was quite saddening. About a month or so ago, a couple mates and I were waiting to get picked up by a taxi when I decided to tell them about the story of Grandpa. So eventually I finished my story and our taxi arrived, with none other than Grandpa at the wheel. Given the nickname Grandpa, I was expecting this story to take a dark turn. Pleasantly surprised. I won tickets to see SNL the exact weekend I was going to the East Coast to visit my dad. If you don't know how SNL tickets work, you register for their raffle in August, and then they email you 2 weeks prior to the show you got selected to. I've never felt luckier. Forgot to mention that you have to be 16 or older to attend the show, and that's exactly how old I turned that year. James Franco hosted, and Muse was the musical guest. I was in perfect health at 23, but had a stroke. Pretty harsh one. Was in a coma for 2 days. When I woke up at the 8,000 employee hospital, they told me I was the first guy ever at my age to come down with something like that. They ran me through every test they had for 3 days and concluded I had a blood clot in my leg. Somehow, sent me back home, and 3 weeks later it happened again. I got into West Point with a 2.77 high school GPA. Hey, someone's gotta bring the average down, right? No, I wasn't a varsity athlete. I did play some sports in HS. Had a 2030 on the new format SAT. Parents weren't military. Yes, I am white, as pointed out from my past submission. Having trained cadets one summer at West Point, you certainly didn't hurt their actual intelligence much. I ran up the rear end of a taxi twice on the same night. The first time I was going clubbing with mates. He'd locked his brakes and I drove straight up the backside. We exchanged details etc. After the club we were driving back. I thought the cab in front looked familiar. He locked his brakes again. I smashed him again. He gets out and turns white. WHYYYY. This was 20 years ago. I won a Frosted Flakes sweepstakes competition about 10 years ago. I was a kid and my mom filled out the form that was on the back of the box and sent it in, and I ended up winning an all expenses paid trip to California, a PlayStation 2, and a shitload of money amongst other things. I always had thought sweepstakes were a scam and companies never followed through, but it turns out there actually are winners. Was working a wine banquet back in college on a nice sunny afternoon in a wide open field with no trees. Pretty much everyone was gone and we were wrapping up after a long day. I yawned and the only bird for miles crap right in my mouth as he flew by. The sucker. That and the brain aneurysm that I had about a 1-250,000 chance of surviving. But I'm still here, looking for that goddamned bird. I've been saving a bottle of X-Lax just for him. Core mother. Brain aneurysms are in my top 3 fears. They're the silent killer. I once went fishing as a teenager. I caught something on my line and eagerly began to reel it in, hoping to see a big goldfish. To my surprise and confusion, what I found on the end of my hook was another fishing line that had somehow become snagged on my original hook. At the end of the fishing line that I had caught on my hook, there was a hook. And on that hook there was a big goldfish. I still can't really comprehend the odds of that happening, but there it is. Someone had clearly caught this fish at an earlier time, but for whatever reason, the line had come off the rod and the fish had gotten away. It would have been less weird if the dumb butt fish had taken my bait, too. But no, I somehow caught the line that held the hook that caught the fish. Wasn't me, but my sister. She was driving to work on a highway. A semi-truck in front of her ran over a big piece of plywood that was in the road. This caused the plywood to go flying right at her vehicle, and it wedged itself under the hood of her car instead of hitting the windshield. You could recreate that event 1,000 times and I don't think it would work out like that. She was very lucky that day. Similar thing happened to my sister-in-law, but the wood went straight through the windscreen, and because she is so short, lodged just above her head. I threw an orange at this bully's bike as he rode away and it bounced once, so perfectly, that it dislodged his chain and the bike abruptly stopped and he was thrown off. He stood up a bloody, crying mess, but oh boy, I was a hero. To anyone saying I was a bully, there was some backstory to this. I was over at my friend's house when this kid, Paul, comes over as well. Now Paul is a bully, so we're just hanging out in my friend's backyard when Paul runs around back and starts, basically, insulting us. My friend went in to get his ma, and that scared Paul. I was not so decent as to be patient, so the above transpired, and it was an orange because Florida, by basically insulting. Well, he was in middle school and we were in elementary school. I hadn't heard those words before. You know, standard your mom and racial slur jokes. TLDR. Met another redditor 850 miles away from me. Turns out, we're perfect for each other. I got bored and lonely one evening, made a throwaway, and put up a post in RR4R to try to find someone to IM with to pass some time. I had some really good conversations with a few different people over the course of a few hours and decided it was time to head to bed. I was going to just delete the post, but I decided to check the oranged one last time before I shut my laptop though. I saw one from someone that I hadn't talked to at all and responded back. Turned out he was working an overnight shift, was bored and decided to see if he could find someone to talk to and help keep him awake. We chatted most of that night until I couldn't stay awake anymore. I got a good morning from him the next day as he was heading to bed after work. We started chatting in chat over the next few weeks. It became an almost constant conversation about one thing or another. Links back and forth. Discussing the links. Finding out that we have more in common than either of us thought was possible to have in common with another person. He lived in NJ and I lived in N. We never expected to ever even meet each other, but we joked about it from time to time and we started talking on the phone. Eventually, we decided it would be a lot better. Horribly awkward, but still better if we could video chat. So we tried that a few times. Then we decided that maybe that wasn't enough and we did need to meet. And that maybe we were in love. So, the week before last Christmas, he flew out to Indiana so we could. It was better than we thought it could be. He came out a couple of more times. And right now, while I'm typing this, he is at work, doing pretty much the same job he was doing when we met, just 850 miles closer to me. He drove out here one last time this past Valentine's Day, and when he leaves work this afternoon, it will be to come home to our home together. Not mine but my dad's. He was retiring and clearing everything out of his office as he was closing his practice. His favorite picture of my stepmom needed to be removed from the frame so he could have it digitized. Having been in the frame so long, it was sticking to the glass. When the picture finally came off, it slipped, fell from however high a 6'3" man would be holding everything to remove it, and fell perfectly into the slit of the shredder, which was on automatic on. Shredded the picture as my dad stood there in stunned silence, unable to comprehend the event that took place just happened and emotional loss of the photograph. Not me, but my dad has survived a lot of ridiculous things. 1. He was struck by lightning and lived. Not only did he live, but he was fine. He didn't even have to go to the hospital. He was just a little terrified and had a headache or something. 2. He survived what's known as a widowmaker heart attack. It's much less common to survive them than to be killed by them. 3. He's accident prone. Just in recent memory he had some kind of mouth infection that put him in the hospital for a week. He rolled a golf cart, luckily not injuring himself or anyone else. He has lots of things like this happen to him. He's the exception to all the rules. Your dad and my dad would be good friends. You name it and it's happened to him. 20 plus surgeries for various things. Rabies shots, stab wounds, perforated ulcer, MRSA, septic shock, paralyzed stomach, dislocated knee many times, infections upon infections, and he never gets a cold. Back in the early 70s I gave shelter to a couple of runaways that were walking around in NYC for a couple of weeks. One day I came back to my app to find it ransacked and them gone. They stole my rent money so I had to move out. I hitchhiked to Miami to move in with my sister. 2 weeks later I ran into one of them in Coconut Grove. I was standing at a corner and spotted him walking towards me from the other corner holding hands with some girl. As soon as he spotted me he said run to the girl and they both ran away as I laughed. Back in high school, I was sitting at my desk in class quietly reading to myself. There was this kid sitting behind me that was being annoying and talking to another kid in the next row over. The teacher kept telling him to be quiet and he eventually lost his crap and threw an orange across the room at the kid. It was a pretty good throw. Without looking up, I reached up and plucked the orange out of the sky with my left hand. I'm right-handed. And slammed it down on my desk without looking up from my book. It turned out that I had caught the orange right before it smacked the kid in the face. The whole class was looking at me in shock. I asked the kid if he would be quiet now and he just nodded his head. I then started peeling the orange and ate it while the teacher stared at me in disbelief. I felt like a bad butt but it was just luck. Let's keep the robot stuff on the DL guys. Sincerely, Roberto Incognito. In one of my college classes the professor told the class that whomever could locate the page in the textbook that had a little blurb about a study conducted by our school district, Washoe County, would win a bag of peanut M&Ms. I hadn't purchased the textbook yet, so while everyone shuffled through their books I just guessed out loud. 674, which, for whatever reason, has always been my go-to number in stupid guessing games. Turns out, I was correct. The book was over 1,000 pages long, so I guess I/1200-ish isn't exactly improbable, but it's still a long shot. I was kind of bummed they were peanut butter M&Ms though. I survived birth in the first few months of my life. I was born 2 months and 3 weeks premature. Doctors thought I'd die, or if I survived, be mentally retarded and or unable to walk. I weighed 2.4 pounds. From what I understand that is pretty good for being born that early. I had underdeveloped lungs. I had heart murmurs that healed up and went away by the time I was 5. Also had a hernia, but that wasn't too bad. Doctors thought I had hydrocephalus but once they saw my father they realized I just had a big head. When I was around 2 months old or so, I tore out my breathing tube and IVs at the same time. The nurse didn't know if she should start my breathing or stop me from bleeding first. I think I was tired of the incubator at that point. My mom says that was the first time she scolded me. She also grounded me. Other than that, I was normal and healthy after a few months of being in the hospital. When I'm done with the military, I think I'm going to try for a career in nursing. Them peeps be saints. Yo. Only problem I have is that my feet don't point outward very much, and it hurts to do so. I can point them inwards very easily. I look normal when I walk, and the only time this has bothered me is when trying to fire a rifle prone. I have to point my toes inward. Got some crap for that at basic training. A few of my friends got a taxi back from a night of drinking in town, and because we all live in the same area, got out at the same place. 2 of us start walking back because we live close by each other, and a car goes past and throws an egg but misses us and breaks up on the floor. Anyway, we carry on walking about a mile or 2 down the road, and my friend puts his hand in his jacket pocket and pulls out an egg. Unbroken, so when we got egged by the car, instead of being a terrible shot, my friend caught it in his jacket pocket without even knowing. Was pretty amazing and what I imagine a once in a lifetime event. My dog peed on the floor. I furiously looked for a floor cleaner for roughly 2 minutes and I was all out. Someone knocks on my door and I'm livid at this point. I answer and it's a vacuum salesman proclaiming that if I give him a few minutes of my time I could keep a bottle of cleaning agent as a gift. That was the only time a door-to-door salesman came though my neighborhood. My sister was married to a man that was a cheating loser druggie. I was on the phone with her and she was telling me about a fight they were having. He beeped in and she told me she would call me right back. I told my husband that the only way my sister would ever get away from that man was if he just died. Her husband died while on the phone with her. His Jeep flipped and he was thrown from the vehicle, landing on his head. When the wreck occurred, the phone went dead and she thought he had hung up on her and was angry. She called me back and we continued to talk until the police arrived to let her know he had died. He died on his way home 100 feet from where they lived. My sister-in-law called me a witch and said she had a list for me. I met my current girlfriend on an afternoon when I was supposed to have a class, which was cancelled at the last moment, on a train back home that I was supposed to have missed. It was delayed by a few minutes, by sitting exactly in the right car of the train. Here I met a girl that was only taking this train once in her life. Japanese tourist traveling Europe by train going from Amsterdam to The Hague. My whole life has changed because of that thing that was so statistically unlikely to ever happen. It's scary, but in a good way. I frequent a forum for paintball enthusiasts and happened to meet someone in my area with the username Stubbs McGee. We met and played paintball several times. Then, one day in a random Halo match, I noticed a Stubbs McGee on my team. Turns out it was the same Stubbs I met on the website. Blew my mind when out of all the people playing Halo at the time, I got matched with someone I knew who wasn't on my friends list. This would be more impressive if the matchmaking system didn't try to connect you to other local players. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.